You know what annoys me? After I turn 40, it seems like my hair texture changed.
Because it absolutely does change.
But why?
You gotta stop shampooing your hair.
Wait, what? You would think me living with a hairstylist, this would not be an issue.
You would think you living with a hairstylist, you would listen when I tell you.
No, you're also my husband. And who listens to their husband?
Nobody. This is actually a really good question. This is something I hear all the time. So I'll explain the reasons that it changes to you. I'll also explain them to you because I'm sure you're wondering too. There's a few different ways it changes. There's the reasons behind those changes. And then there's also things that you can do about it. Okay, so one of the ways that you said it changed is you felt like it got thinner. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes.
Okay, you feel like you have a lot less hair.
I have a lot less hair.
Okay.
Yeah.
So typically speaking, you use like 50 to 100 hairs a day anyway. So kind of keep that in mind just to begin with. Then you got to think that after 40, hormones start to change. So once your hormones start to change, that's going to completely change your hair. It's actually, your hair will change in diameter after 40. So it actually can get smaller, if that makes sense, right? So you might have had maybe even coarse hair that's actually typically thicker in diameter. And then after 40 years old, all of a sudden that starts to get a little bit thinner and thinner. That smaller diameter actually also can be weaker hair.
The diameter like hits home. I remember my grandma when she was older, like her hair was like so like soft and like fuzzy, like, but it was so like thin. So I think it was a diameter. Yeah, that makes sense.
Absolutely can happen. You might be looking at your hair thinking, wow, it's thinning, therefore I'm losing hair, and not realize that part of that hair coming out isn't just coming from your scalp, but it's actually breaking off too. So there's different reasons that you feel like you're losing hair in the shower or at the sink or just seeing less hair on your head. You're also changing many times what you do to your hair. So you're stressing your hair more. Many people to cover gray, they'll start doing color more often or different color, okay? So different colors, if you're trying to cover gray, many times they can be even harder on your hair. So you might be using a color that's harder, that's more damaging on hair that is already potentially weaker. But then on top of that, also because of hormones change, you could be shedding hair. So now you're potentially shedding hair. You're being harder on the hair that's on your head. The hair that's on your head is a smaller diameter and actually weaker. It's breaking off easier. And so all of those things combined mean that you're noticing less hair.
Okay, that makes sense because I remember, I mean, I've had my hair blonde for a long time. I used to have long hair. I used to be able to bleach over bleach over bleach. And I was like, my hair is like foolproof, and now it's like, eep. Yeah.
So now if you have to continue damaging it like that, then what you do instead is say, I'm gonna damage like that, but I need to be mindful about how I take care of my hair to balance out that damage. Am I using heat protectants when I dry it? Am I using leave-in conditioners? Am I using a conditioner once a week or so anyway, just to put back into the hair what your hair needs? Am I doing all the things to give my hair the nutrients it needs to combat as much of that damage that I'm not willing to give up because I need that for the look? Now, the other reason that that is happening, like we talked about, is that your hair is just going through a natural shed process, okay? Your hormones are changing, and so that could be just part of it. Then we're addressing that through nutrients. We're addressing that through diet. We're addressing that potentially through hormone replacements or seeing a doctor and figuring out, is this what's going on? Get a blood test, see a doctor. But talking to a doctor is going to help to kind of
like
get a reference.
Iron, thyroid, those are all
things.
can be.
We'll link in the description Dr. Haver, who's very knowledgeable in this subject and would definitely be somebody I think you should check out. And then start to think about, okay, eating healthy, because you need to get your nutrients through food. Moving your body, blood circulation. Rubbing your scalp stimulates blood circulation and stimulates the sebaceous glands to produce more oil. If your hair produces more oil, which many times as we age, our skin produces less oil. Have you found that?
I'm dry everywhere.
You complain about it all the time. I know you found that.
Always, I'm like, give me the moisture.
Me as well, right? Like my skin has always been very oily, and now as I'm starting to get older, it's starting to get not as oily.
He's got a skincare routine, ladies.
Finally, stepping up to the game, right? So if I'm stimulating the sebaceous glands, then all of a sudden now I'm starting to stimulate a little bit more oil production. We need to pay attention to all of it. I know that's not the sexy fun stuff. Move your body, decrease the stress, because if you think stress isn't changing your hair texture, 1,000% it does.
Oh yeah. Ooh, sleep.
Plays into the stress.
Yeah.
All of those things are very important. Another thing you can do if you feel like your hair is thinning, if you're really starting to notice it, so a lot of times what will happen is people will notice it around their hairline or back even here on the part line, right?
Oh, okay.
But around the hairline is like, that's a very common place.
I've noticed that for sure.
Rogaine could help that, but in the time while you're trying to either use Rogaine, talking to a doctor, seeing if it's the right move, right? Going through all that, there's still going to be even a process of once you start using it, it's going to take a while before they're really thickened. In those scenarios, hair fibers to cover that up, amazing to kind of hide it on a day-to-day basis so you don't notice that it's growing out. If you're damaging hair, like let's say you're going to go get it colored or whatever, this is a test that we do in the salon all the time before color. It's just a good metric to help you understand, are you shedding hair or is your hair breaking off? Pull one of your hairs actually out. And just grab one of them. There you go. Okay. Now you can take this hair, you'll wrap it around your fingers, okay? Okay, you can take that and you can actually pull this. Now your hair has a little bit of elasticity because you can see how you can kind of stretch it out. It's very faint, it's not a lot, okay? Now if your hair was super weak or super damaged right there, when I do this, it's just gonna snap off. Personally, I would take this from not your healthiest hair,
Yeah.
because it's not what's breaking. I would
from
pull
my
this.
blonde.
Yes. Yeah, that's a really good way of kind of getting an idea of how much of this is just snapping off because of color and how much am I actually losing because my hair is shedding. Have you noticed that your hair got dry or more damaged in general?
Yes.
If you've seen any of my videos before, you have heard me talk about this 1,000 times. It's not the big things that matter, it is, but it's a bunch of little things that add up. You've always, and I'm sure many of you have had this too, struggled with oily hair. Your hair feels dirty, your scalp feels dirty.
I don't like that feeling.
And so you shampoo more often than some. You don't change, or many people don't change their shampoo or their conditioning schedules based on the change in their hair or their scalp. So remembering, you're not shampooing your hair, you're shampooing your scalp. You're not conditioning your scalp, you're conditioning your hair. If your hair is getting dry, you shampoo your scalp, you don't shampoo your ends and mid-shaft. But also paying attention to how often are you doing it? Are you just doing what you've always done? Or are you changing it according to what your hair needs based on what's going on currently? That could actually change depending on what you've done to your hair. Maybe you colored it and it got really damaged. Your hair's gonna need a little bit more conditioning at those ends if we're gonna get that somewhat repaired.
I find that I am trying to get more days between washings. So I have like a system, right? I got the full day hair, and then I got the day 2 hair, and then I got the day 3 hair. And if I can do a day 4, it's like a ponytail because then the oils don't bother me. It's when my hair's down, you can kind of feel it.
Yeah.
So it's like ponytail day if I can get another day.
And even, using a dry shampoo or something on the scalp and on that 4th day may help, right? One other thing that you're probably noticing if you're feeling like your hair is more damaged is that you're lacking some of the shine. Dry, kind of damaged hair just has a tendency to look less shiny. And it's part of what makes it look or appear as being damaged. 2 reasons that can happen. One is because if you're going lighter, which a lot of people do, I'm not talking about the damage that lightening your hair requires. Lighter hair has a tendency to look less shiny. Okay, so if you started to lighten your hair up, you're gonna see, because of the way it reflects light, a little bit less shine. Also, it may just be that it's dry and therefore lacking some of that moisture and not giving you the same shine. So one thing to do is actually you can use like a little bit of oil, like a very faint oil. I've got one that I really like. I'll link it in the description below. You put like 1 drop in your hands after your hair is dry. It'll also make your hair feel a little bit softer. Another way you could do it is actually just to use spray shine. Spray shines are basically like that shining oil, but just a very fine mist. Do not use those on tile or wood. You will be sliding everywhere. They're a nightmare. Over carpet or lay your towel down. They're great for not giving your hair any control, nothing like that, but just a couple of sprays just to give it a little bit of that shine back. That's it. You're not gonna like this next one. The other way is, like we talked about before, you only shampoo the roots. You don't shampoo the mid-shaft and the ends because we need that oil that's there to give it back the moisture that it's lacking. One of the things that I see that's a problem with a lot of shampoos is that they suds up. And they suds up so much that a little bit, you can't control where that shampoo is going.
I know
it's
where you're
everywhere.
going with this.
Yes.
I know where you're going with this.
A shampoo that does not have sulfates that typically make it sud up, those are going to be easier to manipulate where you're applying them. Because it's like you're using a conditioner, you have more control over where it goes. It doesn't sud up. And people like yourself, you hate that.
I love the suds because it makes you feel like you're getting it clean, right?
Exactly. But understand, it makes you feel like you're getting it clean. Except I will say that, again, because it is easier to emulsify through hair, if your hair is super long, super thick, and you have to get it through the hair, then it would be easier to get something that suds up really dramatically through that hair.
Okay.
And many people will only shampoo with the conditioner very much in the same way that you would use the new wash. But the new wash has some cleaning
I've never
ability.
heard of people washing their hair with just conditioner.
Oh,
I thought it was
it's
just
a
a.
thing.
Oh wow.
It's very popular like in the curly girl world.
Oh,
Yeah, we got curly
No,
hair.
my
I'm
hair
sure you've heard of
sticks
it.
straight, so I've never heard of that.
I still think that on some level you should be using some sort of shampoo, and then the conditioner you apply to the ends.
Got it.
Okay, so now there's one other way that your hair is likely changed. Your hair gets coarser and more frizzy. And we'll actually talk about frizz separately in just a second. So I've got a whole thing where I'll talk about frizz and why that happens. Speaking specifically to coarse. If you find that your hair is getting more coarse or wiry, there's a few different reasons that could be happening. hyperthyroidism, like you talked about before, calcium deficiency, iron deficiency, essentially hormones changing. So that's something you want to pay attention to. Many times coarse hair in general needs more moisture than a lot of times you can even produce. So it ends up being very kind of like dry and coarse and wiry and hard to manage, right? Extra heat styling, like we talked about before, can kind of create that same kind of feel in your hair. The way you deal with it is very similar to the way you deal with damaged hair in general, because the larger problem with it is that it's just lacking the moisture. So you need to get the moisture back into it. So you need to, again, pay attention to how you're shampooing your hair, how often you're shampooing your hair, if you're conditioning your hair, are you using a heat protectant before you style? Everybody needs to be using a heat protectant on their hair if you're using heat.
Like SPF for your hair.
In a way, yes. So, or like some leave-in conditioners. I'll put one in the description I like. You know, there are some that are very light that you can use that'll actually just give your hair a little bit more nutrients. The one that I like is actually not a great heat protector, so you would want to use another heat protector as well. But as far as a light leave-in conditioner, it's not going to weigh your hair down. I like it for that.
I really like it too, because I noticed that, you know, having blonde hair, it's kind of, you get out of the shower and it's kind of hard to brush through, so it makes it easier. So it's kind of, I use it as like a detangler.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One other thing that you can do is silk pillowcases at night are actually a really good idea because you're minimizing the friction. But also, silk pillowcases don't pull the moisture out like cotton pillowcases do. So it'll help it retain some of the moisture that it needs, as well as dial out some of the friction that
I hear some people using bonnets.
That's probably, yeah. I mean,
oh, honey, I'm gonna start going to bed with bonnets on in my Invisalign and my red light therapy mask and my robe.
Is this where we insert song "Bringing Sexy Back"? Now let's get on to Frizz, because everybody, I think that's like one of the biggest things that people like complain
I
about.
think frizz is a big problem for everybody. Even like my hair sticks straight, but I still get frizz from the damage.
There are a lot of reasons that your hair can look frizzy. A lot of them require completely different approaches to how to manage them. So what could happen is that your hair texture changed, like we talked about, and you actually see that as frizz. What also could be happening is if your hair fell out, you started using minoxidil or something and started coming back in, you're gonna have hairs that are, after a few months, half the length of the rest of your hair. So those hairs have the ability to stand up because they're not long enough to lay down and blend into the rest of your hair. So if you are not drying your hair with the correct process, meaning blowing those down, if you're blowing them all up, that actually can create crazy little hairs that are standing up, or they have a bunch of volume and they're standing out and you're like, what's going on? In those scenarios, some people like to use the round brushes, blow dryer round brushes. Not the best option because you cannot control where the air goes.
Yeah.
This is why
Still
I say
blowing them out. It's still blowing things
Yep,
out.
it actually enhances that, right? Or it can enhance that. Maybe your hair is breaking off because it's been overprocessed and those ends look frizzy and that's what you're dealing with. Well, then we want to, again, make sure that we're using the correct shampoo process, conditioning process, giving it as much moisture as possible and paying attention to how much we're drying them. One other way that you're going to see frizz, and this is for those curly ladies out there because I always get this question. This is the most important thing that I can tell anybody with curly hair. From the point that your hair is wet to the point that it is dry, everything you do is either minimizing frizz or encouraging frizz. The misconception here is that there's some middle ground. So for instance, you can use a blow dryer or a flat iron or curling iron or something else, that type of heat delivery system, to manage the frizz, to help on some levels to lay that down and make it look smooth. If you're trying to dry it curly, diffusing it, you can't do that. You're reliant on some sort of product coating the hair from roots to ends to manage that frizz for you. And then everything you do is basically telling your hair to get frizzy. And it's just trying to minimize how much you're telling your hair to get frizzy. You're riling it up every single thing you do. People are like, oh no, I let mine air dry. But when you air dry it, that process takes longer than drying it. If the process takes longer, it simply means that there's longer of a time period for any sort of outside influence. You touched your hair, you opened the door and it was windy, you drove to work and your car window was down or your sunroof was, literally everything that happens can encourage frizz. That's really where diffusers kind of come in, is because they minimize the airflow so that it's not so dramatic, but they try to also at the same time maximize the time efficiency so it gets them dry faster. So in those scenarios, if you've got curly hair, you're thinking my hair is changing, getting drier, maybe even more coarse, maybe more damaged. So all of the things that you do become even more important. So you have to pay more attention or be more vigilant about paying attention to if you're getting enough nutrients in, if your hormones are as level as they possibly can, or if that's a thing that you want to look into, if you're getting the amount of conditioning that you need, if you're drying it the right way, if you're shampooing it as often or not as often as you need, right? All of those things really play a role. If you want to learn more about that, why don't you go ahead and check out this video right over there. And otherwise, we will see you next week. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for having a conversation up top.
Ooh, we made it.
We did.
Usually we miss it.
And, it was pretty good up top.